Okay, so welcome to week number 3 of our economics class. So in this lesson, we will cover 6 major areas. So first is the law of demand and supply. Number 2 is the shifts in demand and supply curves. Number 3, we will have the market equilibrium and disequilibrium. Number 4, we have the price elasticity of demand and supply. Number 5, the income and cross price elasticity. And then number 6 is the applications, the pricing strategies, taxes, and subsidies. So while we are listening to this, you can also take a look at the notes I prepared for you. The notes I prepared for you are just very short and outline type, okay? But of course, you will have to listen to the main content, which is what I will be talking about here. So let me start for this week. So welcome to week number 3 of our economics class. So this week we're diving into one of the most fundamental concepts in economics: demand, supply, and market equilibrium. So these concepts are the building blocks of how markets work, and understanding them will help you make better business decisions, whether you're setting prices, launching a product, or analyzing competitors. So think of demand and supply as the heartbeat of any market. They determine what gets to be produced, how much is sold, and at what price. So for example, when you walk into a coffee shop and see the price of a latte, that price isn't arbitrary. It's the result of countless interactions between buyers, the demand, and the sellers, the supply. So if the shop raises the price too high, fewer people will buy. If they lower it too much, they might run out of coffee because everyone wants a cup. So this balance is what we call market equilibrium. So let's recall the 10 principles of economics there, right? So it's very much in play here. So the ones that we discussed in week number 1. And this is where the magic happens, right? But it's not just about the prices, of course. So understanding demand and supply helps us predict how markets will react to changes, like a sudden increase in the cost of raw materials, for example, or a new competitor entering the market, or even a global event like the pandemic that happened in 2020. So these concepts are not just theoretical, they are tools that you can use to make smarter decisions in your business or career. So this week we will break it all down step by step. We'll start with the laws of demand and supply, then explore how shifts in demand and supply curves affect the markets. So we will also dive into market equilibrium, price elasticity, and real-world applications. So like pricing strategies, taxes, and subsidies. So by the end of this week, you'll have a solid understanding of how markets function and how you can apply these principles in your work. Okay, let's get started. So number 1 is the law of demand and supply. So let's start with the law of demand. This law states that all else being equal, we call that in economics ceteris paribus. So all else held constant, or all else being equal, as the price of a good or service increases, the quantity demanded decreases. Okay? So as the price increases, the quantity decreases. And of course, vice versa, if the price decreases, the quantity demanded will increase. So in simple terms, people buy more when things are cheaper, of course, and they buy less when things are more expensive. So to make this more concrete, let's use the example of coffee. So imagine you're running a coffee shop and you're trying to figure out how to price your latte. If you set the price at 5 pesos per cup, you might sell 100 cups a day. And then you decide to lower the price to 3 pesos. So you will notice that there's a greater number of people wanting to buy, and from 100, you could sell now 150 cups a day. So on the other hand, you decided to raise it one day to 7 pesos. Of course, this is just a theoretical example, okay? Some customers might decide it's too expensive already. They might switch to tea or make coffee at home, or you might only sell 50 cups a day. So, considering, of course, that you're the only one selling coffee in that place of yours, okay? So, this is the law of demand in action. So, price and quantity demanded move in opposite directions. So, that is why you will recall the graph of demand, right? So it's falling down from the top, from the Y curve, it goes down, and the slope is going down. Okay, so the reason for this is, of course, the higher the price, the lower the demand. The quantity is the horizontal line, remember? So that's the idea. Now let's talk about the law of supply. The law states that all else being equal, again, ceteris paribus, as the price of a good or service increases, the quantity supplied increases as well. Okay, so as the price decreases, the quantity supplied decreases. So here we are talking about the producers, right? So if the prices is high, then of course the producers are willing to supply more. So when the prices are low, then they will produce less because they will not sell more, right? The bottom line there would be the revenue. The sales will not be worth it for them to even go into business. So let's stick with the coffee example. So if the price of the coffee rises to 7 per cup, then some other coffee shops will want to produce and they will sell more coffee because they can make more profit. Yeah, so they might hire more baristas, buy more coffee beans, or even open longer hours to meet the increased demand. But if the price drops to 3 pesos, they might reduce the amount they produce because it's less profitable. Okay, they might cut back on staff, reduce their hours, or even stop selling certain types of coffee that aren't making any money, right? So the higher the price, the more they're willing to produce or sell. Okay, so these two laws and even the connection between the two laws, right? The demand and supply, these are the foundations of how market operates. They explain why the prices go up or down and how buyers and sellers interact. Think of them as the invisible forces, according to Adam Smith, right? The invisible hand. They shape every market from coffee shops to global industries. Let's look at another example to make this even clearer. So the market of smartphones, when the new iPhone is released at high price, only a certain number of people are willing to buy it. But as the price drops over time, isn't it that, for example, Globe and Smart puts iPhone as part of their plan, right? And then some of the more eager and more able to buy customers, of course, they fall in line. Just as soon as iPhone 16 Pro Max, for example, comes out, they will buy it. But for those people who might not be able to afford it, they will wait for maybe 1-2 years. So sometimes I do that, right? So when the iPhone, for example, iPhone 17 or iPhone 18 comes out, okay, that's your signal to buy the iPhone brand that's released 1 or 2 years ago because it's much more cheaper now than it was when it was relatively new, right? So that's the idea from the consumer side. No? They will be willing to purchase it when the price drops over time. So on the supply side, on the other hand, when the price of the smartphones is high, companies like Apple or Samsung, of course, they're motivated to produce more units to maximize profits. Of course, this is just one part of the ball game, okay? Because you have to consider also the cost, right? So that's a different story. But all else held constant. That's why we are saying that companies like Apple, Samsung, Huawei, they're motivated to produce more units in order to maximize profits. But if the prices would drop too low, they might reduce production or even focus on newer models. That is the law of supply. So these laws aren't just theoretical, they work in every market every day. Whether you're buying groceries, booking a flight, or investing in stocks, demand and supply are shaping the prices and the decisions you make. Okay, let's go now to number 2, the shifts in demand and supply curve. Now that we understand the basic laws of demand and supply, let's talk about the shifts in demand and supply curves. So a shift occurs when something other than price changes the quantity demanded or supplied. This is different from moving along the curve, which happens only when the price changes. So let's break this down. So first, let's look at the shifts in demand. So demand can increase or decrease due to factors like changes in consumer preferences, income, prices of related goods, or what we call them sometimes as substitutes, right? Or expectation about the future. So for example, imagine a new study comes out saying coffee improves productivity, right? So there's a new study that says that, or coffee improves health over time, okay? So this could increase the demand for coffee because more people would want to buy it even if the price stays the same. So the demand curve shifts to the right, meaning that at every price level, people are willing to buy more coffee. On the other hand, if a study says coffee is harmful, it hurts you in the long run, it causes certain cancers or all that, demand might decrease and the curve would shift to the left, even if the price doesn't really change. So another example, of course, would be the changes in income. So if people's incomes increase, they might buy more coffee, buy more premium coffee, even if the price stays the same. This would shift the demand curve to the right. But if incomes decrease, okay, so for example, there's recession, there are people being let go in the office, so some of them are not retaining their jobs, then people might switch to cheaper alternatives, shifting the demand curve to the left. Okay, what about shifts in supply can increase or decrease due to factors like changes in production costs, technology, or the number of sellers in the market. So if a drought destroys coffee crops, the supply of coffee will decrease because there's less coffee available to sell. The supply curve shifts to the left, meaning that at every price level, producers are willing to supply less coffee. Conversely, if there's a new technology that makes coffee farming more efficient, the supply of coffee might increase, shifting the supply curve to the right. So that's the example on the supply side. Of course, there are other examples here. No? So another example is changes in the number of sellers. If more coffee shops open in our city, the overall supply of coffee, of course, will increase, shifting the supply curve to the right. But if some coffee shops go out of business or they transfer to another location, the supply will decrease, shifting the curve to the left. So here it is important to note that shifts in the demand and supply are different from movements along the curve, which happens only when price changes. So the shifts in the demand and supply happens irrespective or regardless of the price change. So shifts occur when external factors change the entire relationship between price and quantity. Okay, so I didn't do any more the examples of production costs and other things, but you get the idea, right? So there are many factors that affect the changes in the demand and supply curve, other than price, of course. Okay, let's now go to number 3, market equilibrium and disequilibrium. So now that we understand demand, supply, and shifts in their curves, let's dive deeper into the market equilibrium. This is the point where the quantity demanded equals the quantity supplied. This is the the middle point. Remember the graph that I showed you about perfect competition, oligopoly, and all that. So the point where the demand and the supply meets, that intersection point, that would be your market equilibrium. So at the equilibrium, there is no surplus or shortage. We are producing the right amount of goods and we are consuming the exact amount of goods being produced. Okay, so there is no shortage, there is no surplus. So the example again on the coffee will make this concrete. So imagine the equilibrium price for a coffee is 5. Okay, so 5 pesos. Of course, the example here is not realistic. There's no 5 peso coffee anymore. But just for the sake of clear and very simple to understand example. So at this price, for example, at 5, the number of cups consumers want to buy exactly match the number of cups the coffee shops want to sell. So at 5, that is the equilibrium point. They might want, for example, the consumers might want to buy 100 cups and the coffee shops are willing to sell 100 cups. That is a state of market equilibrium, a state of balance where everyone is happy. Of course, in reality, this doesn't happen very often. This is a theoretical example, but you will see that it has bearing, of course. Yeah? So, of course, the equilibrium point shifts every moment. Okay, so you don't really see that, for example, if the customers want 100 today, then the next day they will also want 100. Or in the same way, the producers will always match that. Of course, that doesn't happen, right? So that's why there's always fluctuation. Now, let's go back to the example. What happens if the price isn't at equilibrium? So if the supply is more than the demand, right? The supply is more than demand, then there is surplus. If the supply is already depleted and there's still demand, or there is a point of what we call the demand is not fulfilled or unfulfilled demand, then that is the shortage, no? So surplus when the price is too high. So imagine if the price of the coffee rises to, let's say, 7 or even 10, right? So the coffee shops are motivated to produce more because they can make profit. However, the consumers will find that price is already too high for them. So they cannot afford to buy it. Maybe they can, but not every day. So the sales of the coffee shops will eventually go down, right? Or maybe what will happen is that if they are willing to sell 150 cups, or they are ready to sell 150 cups, they might be able to sell only 50 or even lesser than that. So this will create a surplus. There's more coffee available than people want to buy. So what happens next there? The coffee shops will notice that they're not selling all their coffee. To get rid of the excess, they might lower their price, right? So this is a disequilibrium, and then you will now see that the price will continue now to shift to the other direction. So as the price drops, consumers will again start buying more and the coffee shops will produce less. So again, you will reach a sort of an equilibrium point, maybe at 550. So that's the idea here, okay? So when there is shortage, the price is too low. Okay, so when there's shortage, that means the price is too low, meaning, so let's look at the example. Let's say the coffee drops at 3. So at this very low price, then consumers will want to buy more. Maybe even those who are not coffee drinkers before will start buying coffee, right? And they see in the window the prices of coffee. Oh, it's only 3 pesos, okay, per cup. Okay, I'm gonna buy coffee today. I'm not gonna prepare my coffee at home. I'm gonna buy here, okay? But because of that, so for example, the coffee shop is just ready to sell 100 cups that day, right? But because the prices are very low, then more and more customers are coming in to buy. And sometimes it results in it's just half day and you've already sold everything. So there's no more coffee around. So for customers who would come in the afternoon, they will be surprised to say, hey, the coffee is gone. So there will be now shortage. So that is the result there. So what would happen next? Consumers will notice that the coffee is selling out quickly, and some might even be willing to pay more. This is what's happening, especially during shortages, or sometimes even during crisis situation like wars or whatever. And this is not about coffee, sometimes it's about staple food like rice or whatever they're buying, pork, chicken, something like that. So when the products are selling out quickly, some might even be willing to pay more to get their product. On the other hand, the producers, in this case the coffee shops, seeing the high demand, might even raise their prices, right? So as the price increases, consumers will buy less, coffee shops will produce more, and there again, you will go and march, maybe unknowingly or knowingly, to the equilibrium point again. So it started at this equilibrium, and then the sword of the invisible hand of the market will lead you back to the mean. We call that the mean reversion. So the invisible hand. So the process of moving towards equilibrium is called the invisible hand of the market, a concept introduced by Adam Smith himself, the father of economics or modern economics. But he was not really modern because he started writing about the wealth of nations, the economics book, in the 18th century or something like that. So it's the idea that markets naturally adjust to find the balance without needing external intervention. So this is in defiance, so to speak, to the 10 principles of economics about government, right? So it's the idea that even without external intervention, of course, the government would be the primary intervener there. So prices act as signals. So when prices are too high, they signal producers to lower them, and when prices are too low, they signal producers to raise them. So this self-correcting mechanism keeps market functioning efficiently. So this equilibrium in real lives. Sometimes market experience this equilibrium for extended periods. It's like, for example, during natural disaster, there might be a shortage of essential goods like water or fuel because supply is disrupted. Prices might rise sharply, but if the governments impose price controls, the shortage can persist because the market isn't allowed to adjust. So in the case of luxury goods, there might be a surplus if demand suddenly drops due to the changing consumer preferences. So for instance, if people start favoring electric cars over gasoline cars, there could be a surplus of gasoline cars until producers adjust their supplies. So what is the application in business? Understanding equilibrium is crucial for business. For example, if you're launching a new product, you need to find the right price where the demand meets the supply. Set the price too high and you might not sell enough. Set it too low, you might run out of stock or lose money, or we call this the opportunity cost, right? So you lost the opportunity to sell higher, of course. So if you're managing inventory, you need to anticipate shifts in demand and supply to avoid surpluses or shortages. So for instance, during the holiday season, retailers often increase their supply to meet higher demand. So market equilibrium is the sweet spot. It is the sweet spot where supply meets demand and prices stabilize. This equilibrium occurs when there's a mismatch between supply and demand. Okay, now let's go to number 4, price elasticity of demand and supply. So now that we've covered market equilibrium, let's dive into price elasticity. So which measures how responsive quantity demanded or supplied is to changes in price. So this is where we measure the responsiveness of the quantity demanded or supplied. whenever there's a price change. Okay, so this is incredibly important for businesses because it helps them understand how changes in pricing will affect sales and revenue. So let's start with the price elasticity of demand. So this measures how much the quantity demanded changes when the price changes. So there are two main types of demand elasticity. We have the elastic and inelastic demand. So when you say elastic demand, if the demand is elastic, it means more consumers are very sensitive to price changes. So a small change in price leads to a large change in quantity demanded. So it means that, for example, if the price of coffee increases by 10%, then the quantity demanded drops by, I don't know, like 25% or 30% even. So when that happens, that means the demand is elastic. Of course, you will only understand this as time goes by. The longer you stay in the market, especially as seller or producer, then the more you will understand this. Okay, so you should have an analysis of the demand, the supply. You should have the analysis. Oh, this is the time when we raise the price by 10%. Look at our moving average of our sales. It dropped by 15 or 18%. So you will have now an understanding where price leads you and whether your product is elastic or inelastic. So luxury goods often they have elastic demand because people can easily cut back if the prices rise. So meaning, so luxury goods, they're not really essential anyway. So for example, if the designer handbags goes up by 20%, then many consumers might switch to cheaper alternatives and they will altogether remove their desire to buy those luxury items. And then they will reason out, oh, we don't need them anyway. So what about inelastic demand? Inelastic demands means consumers aren't very sensitive to price changes. So a changes in price leads to a smaller change in quantity demanded. So of course, one big example here, or one important example here would be the prices of medicine, right? Because it seems to me that, of course, medicine is something that you really need, right? So, for example, the price of insulin increases by 10%, right? So, even if it increases by that much, then the quantity demanded will not drop by that much also because you need it, right? Especially the ones who are buying insulin are, of course, in need of insulin. So the quantity demanded will only drop maybe by 1% or 2%, or maybe sometimes they don't even drop at all. So the demand is inelastic. So essential goods like medicine, they are often inelastic. They have inelastic demand because people need them regardless of price. Even if the price of insulin goes up, patients will still buy it because it's a necessity for them. Okay, price elasticity of supply now. So this measures how much the quantity supplied changes when the price changes. So like demand, supply can also be elastic or inelastic. So if the supply is elastic, it means producers can quickly increase output when prices rise. So for example, if the price of coffee increases, coffee shops can easily buy more beans and hire more staff to meet the higher demand. So this is common in industries with flexible production processes. So this is the elastic supply. So if the supply, on the other hand, is inelastic, it means producers cannot easily adjust output when prices change. So one big example here, of course, is when the price of oil increases, oil producers might not be able to quickly drill more wells because of technical or regulatory constraint. So this is common in industries with limited resources or long production timeline. So if it's not easy for them to adjust their supply mechanism, then their supply would be inelastic. So why is this important? Why is elasticity important? So understanding elasticity is crucial for businesses. For example, if demand for your product is elastic, raising prices might lead to a significant drop in sales. So you have to know that because it will hurt your revenue. So instead, you might focus on lowering prices to attract more customers. But of course, since we talked already about market structures, then more or less about the situation in your industry. Okay? So next, if demand is inelastic, you might have more flexibility to raise prices without losing many customers. So this is common in industries like pharmaceuticals or utilities. If supply is elastic, you can quickly ramp up production to meet higher demand. But if the supply is inelastic, you might struggle to meet demand, leading to shortages or even higher prices. So if it is inelastic, you have no choice but sometimes to raise the prices. So let's look at a real world example, like during the COVID-19, isn't it? The COVID-19 pandemic, the demand for hand sanitizer skyrocketed because supply was initially inelastic. Factories couldn't quickly produce more, so the prices soared. The prices increased, right? Over time, of course, more and more producers entered the market and increased the supply. Prices eventually stabilized. So this shows how elasticity affects both prices and availability in real time. Right. Okay, now let's go to number 5, income elasticity and cross price elasticity. So now that we have covered price elasticity, let's explore two related concepts, income elasticity and cross price elasticity. These help us understand how demand for a product changes in response to changes in consumer income or the prices of related goods. So income elasticity measures how demand for a good changes when consumer income changes. So it is calculated as the percentage change in quantity demanded divided by the percentage change in income. Again, percentage change in the demand over the percentage change in income. Okay, so depending on the result, goods can be classified as either normal goods, inferior goods, or luxury goods. So what are normal goods? Normal goods, if the demand of the good increases as income increases, it is called a norm. For example, if people earn more, they might buy more high-quality coffee or dine out more often. The income elasticity for normal goods is positive. What about inferior good? If demand for a good decreases as income rises, it's called inferior good. So for example, as people earn more, they might buy less instant coffee and switch to premium brand. So the income elasticity for inferior goods is negative. So you're shifting brand to a much higher brand because you can afford to buy more. That's why it's called inferior good. What about luxury goods? These are a special type of normal good. So it's a normal good. The demand increases more proportionally to the income. However, if the income increases by 10%, for example, and then the demand for luxury cars might increase by 20%, so that means luxury goods have an income elasticity greater than 1. So the more it accelerates, the demand for that luxury item accelerates. So the example here, so let's look at the real world example. During an economic boom means, of course, everything is okay, the economy is doing well, right? When incomes rise, the demand for luxury goods like designer clothing, high-end electronics, gadgets tend to increase. That's why even in the whole year, during December, there's a temporary boom because you are getting your bonuses, your 13-month pay, and all that. So during that time, people would buy more expensive things like, I don't know, laptops or gadgets or smartphones or whatever. Or they can even travel. They can decide to travel to another country, right? So there's more traveling, there's more consumption during that time of year. So that is an example of that. But during a recession, when incomes fall, the demand for inferior goods like generic brands or public transportation might increase. Okay, cross price elasticity. Cross price elasticity measures how demand for one good changes when the price of another good changes. So of course, these are in connection with them being substitutes or complements. So this is calculated as the percentage change in quantity demanded of good A divided by the percentage change in the price of good B. So depending on the result, goods can be classified as substitutes or complements. So if two goods are substitutes, an increase in the price of one will increase the demand for the other. So if the price of tea rises, the demand for coffee might increase because they will go to the substitute. They will go to the cheaper alternative. So that is the idea of being a substitute. So the cross price elasticity for substitutes is positive. Okay? What about complements? Complements, if two goods are complements, that means an increase in the price of one will decrease the demand for the other. So for example, if the price of coffee rises, the demand for coffee creamer might also decrease because people will be buying less coffee, and therefore they will be buying also less creamer. So the cross price elasticity for complements is negative. Okay, so let's look at the real world example here. So in this case of the prices of smartphones, if they increase, the demand for smartphone accessories like cases or chargers might decrease because fewer people are buying smartphones anyway. On the other hand, if you're looking at substitute example, so if the price of iPhone increases, the demand for Android phones maybe might increase because the consumers will look for alternatives. Okay, why are these concepts important? So understanding income elasticity and cross price elasticity is crucial for businesses. So for example, if you're selling a luxury good, you need to be aware of how changes in the economy might affect the demand for your product. During a recession, you might need to adjust your marketing or pricing strategies. If you're selling a product with close substitutes, you need to monitor competitors' prices. A price increase by a competitor could lead to a higher demand for your product. So if you're selling complementary goods, you need to consider how changes in the price of the main product will affect the demand for your product. So if you are selling coffee machines, a drop in the price of coffee beans might increase demand for your machines because of course they will be buying more coffee. Okay, so income elasticity and cross price elasticity help us understand how demand is influenced by changes in income and the prices of related goods. So these are essential for making informed business decisions and anticipating market trends. Okay, let's go to the last point here, number 6, applications, pricing strategies, taxation, and subsidies. So now we have covered the core concepts of demand, supply, and elasticity. Let's explore how these ideas are applied in the real world. Specifically, we will look at pricing strategies, taxation, and subsidies. So these applications are critical for businesses, governments, and policy makers. So pricing strategies, understanding demand and supply helps businesses set prices that maximize revenue and profit. So for elastic demand, if the demand for your product is elastic, raising prices might lead to a significant drop in sales, hurting your revenue. Instead, you might focus on lowering prices to attract more customers. So for example, streaming services like Netflix often keep their prices low to attract a large customer base because the demand for entertainment is relatively elastic. If the demand is inelastic, so if we have an inelastic demand, you might have more flexibility to raise prices without losing many customers. So this is common in industries like pharmaceuticals or utilities. So for example, life-saving drugs often have inelastic demand, so pharmaceutical companies can charge higher prices, which is really happening. Dynamic pricing. So some businesses use dynamic pricing where prices change based on the demand and supply condition. So if we can do this, then so much the better, of course. For example, airlines increase ticket prices during peak travel seasons when the demand is high and lower the prices during off-peak times. Now let's go to taxation. Taxes are a common tool used by the government to raise revenues or influence behavior. How do taxes affect markets? So tax on producers. When a tax is imposed on producers, it increases their cost, shifting the supply curve to the left. So this leads to a higher prices for consumers and lower quantities sold. So if the government imposes a tax on cigarettes, the price of cigarettes will of course rise and fewer cigarettes will be sold. Tax on consumers, number 2. When a tax is imposed on consumers, it reduces their willingness to pay, shifting the demand curve to the left. This also leads to higher prices and lower quantities sold. So for example, a sales tax on luxury goods might reduce demand for those goods. This happened, of course, in the Philippines when they started imposing the train law, right? So the taxes is a burden for consumers, and because of that, a lot of companies suffered. In auto sales, for example, Toyota, among other car makers, also suffered decline. And so tax incidence, this refers to those who ultimately bears the burden of the tax. So even if the tax is imposed on producers, consumers might end up paying most of it through higher prices, especially if the demand is inelastic. Subsidies. What about subsidies? Subsidies are payment made by the government to support certain industries or activities. So subsidy to producers, when a subsidy is given to producers, it lowers their costs, shifting the supply curve to the right. Parang ayuda on the producer side. This leads to lower prices for consumers and higher quantities sold. So subsidies for renewable energy can lower the cost of solar panels, making them more affordable for consumers. Subsidy to consumers. When a subsidy is given to consumers, it increases their willingness to pay, shifting the demand curve to the right. So this also leads to higher quantities sold. So for example, subsidies for electric vehicles can increase demand for those vehicles. So subsidies, of course, can help support emerging industries or address market failures. So that is the impact on markets. So subsidies, for example, for education or healthcare can make these services more accessible to the public. So let's look at the real-world examples for this, like pricing strategies. Amazon, for example, uses dynamic pricing to adjust prices based on the demand, competitor prices, and other factors. This helps them maximize revenue and stay competitive. On taxation, many governments impose taxes on sugary drinks to reduce consumption and address public health concerns. These taxes increase the price of sugary drinks, leading to a lower demand. Subsidies. Government often subsidize agriculture to ensure food security and support farmers. Well, in this country, it doesn't do that. That's the sad fact. So these subsidies lower the cost of production, leading to a lower food prices for consumer. So we have to understand demand, supply, elasticity, because it helps businesses set effective pricing strategies. Government will design taxes, and policymakers will implement subsidies. These tools are essential for managing markets and achieving economic goals. So this finally brings us to the end of week number 3, where we have explored the foundational concepts of demand, supply, and market equilibrium. We started with the laws of demand and supply, which explain how prices and quantities are determined in a market. We then discussed the shifts in demand and supply curves, which occur due to factors other than price, such as changes in consumer preferences, income, or production costs. We also covered market equilibrium, the point where supply meets demand, and disequilibrium, which occurs when there's a mismatch between supply and demand. We also went to discussing about price elasticity, which measures how responsive demand and supply are to price changes, and explored about income elasticity and cross-price elasticity, which show how demand is influenced by changes in income and the prices of related goods. Finally, we looked at real-world applications, including pricing strategies, taxation, subsidies, and how these tools are used by businesses and the governments to influence markets. I said governments because I'm talking about the many governments in the world. Of course, in our case, the government, meaning just one government. These concepts, as I said, these are not theoretical. They are practical tools that you can use as business practitioners to better business decisions, whether you are setting prices, launching a product, or analyzing market trends. So now let's take a quick peek into next week's topic. So next week, week number 4 is very exciting, very important, and this is very, I always say very, okay, I'm sorry about that. This is quite interesting for me. One of the things, one of the lessons in economics that I really enjoy teaching. So it's called game theory and strategic decision making. So if you wonder why companies like Coca-Cola and Pepsi are constantly watching each other's moves, or why airlines adjust their prices based on what their competitors are doing, so we will explore game theory. This is a framework for understanding how businesses make strategic decisions in competitive environments. So we will also look at concepts like the Nash equilibrium. This is one of my most favorite topics. The prisoner's dilemma and the dominant strategies, and see how they apply in real-world businesses and business scenarios. It's going to be a fascinating next week ahead of us. So we will look into the psychology and the strategy behind decision making. So thank you for your attention this week. I look forward to seeing you and hearing from you next week in our next session. If you have questions or want to discuss any of the topics further, feel free to reach out in our class, in Google Class. So have a great week ahead. Have a great weekend ahead. And get ready for some strategic thinking next time. Well, thank you. God bless.